Terra did not sleep. It could not sleep. The Throneworld groaned beneath the weight of uncounted trillions. Hive upon hive stacked like tumours around the holy carcass of old Earth. Its skies were choked with ash and prayer smoke. Its oceans long since boiled into memory. Its continents buried beneath adamantium, ceramite, and the bones of forgotten ages. From orbit, Terra gleamed like a sacred reliquary. Beneath that gleam, it rotted. Far beneath the cathedrals and spires, below the administratum vaults and the reliquary-sealed subcontinents, beneath even the most wretched lower hive districts, where sunlight was a myth and hope a crime, there existed places no map recorded. Places where the Imperium had built, and built, and built again, until even history lost track of what lay underneath. Hive Tertius Theta, lower stratum 998 M42. That was where the miners screamed. The mining team of Extraction Unit Kappa 9 were nobodies, even by the standards of the Underhive. They were sanctioned labourers, barely, indentured to the Adeptus Terra through a web of contracts none of them could read. Their task was simple: bore deeper, harvest plasteel and rador veins, and send the Emperor's tithe upward. No questions, no deviations, no delays. Cargus Vel, the foreman, had stopped believing in simple 40 years ago. "Pressure's wrong," he muttered, adjusting the cracked auspex mounted to his wrist. The device clicked and spat static, its machine spirit irritated. Rock density just dropped off. "That's impossible," said Eliza Wren, the youngest of the crew, her rebreather hissing softly as she spoke. "We're 3 kilometers down. There shouldn't be void pockets." "Tell that to the wall," Cargos replied. The wall in question, if it could be called that, was a slab of blackened stone veined with metallic scars. It did not match the surrounding strata. It was older, smoother. The drilling rig screamed as it bit into the surface. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the wall gave way. The world dropped out from under them. Cargos barely had time to shout before the ground collapsed, the drill vanishing into darkness as the miners were dragged screaming into the void. They fell, clattering, tumbling, slamming into cables and each other, before crashing onto something hard and uneven. Silence followed. Not the comforting silence of stopped machinery, but a vast, oppressive quiet that pressed against their ears. Liza groaned, her lumen flickering as she rolled onto her side. "Foreman, Emperor preserve us. Where are we?" Cargos forced himself upright, his ribs screaming. His auspex spun uselessly, unable to find reference points. "We're somewhere we're not supposed to be." They activated their lumens. The light did not find walls. It found space. Their beams cut through an enormous cavern, so vast the darkness swallowed illumination like a predator. The ceiling was lost in shadow. The floor stretched outward, uneven and fractured, covered in an ash-like dust that puffed beneath their boots. "This isn't natural," whispered one of the miners. "This can't be." Then the light touched bone. A ribcage rose from the ground like a cathedral ruin. Each rib was thicker than a hab-block support strut, arcing high before plunging back into the earth. Nearby lay a skull the size of a transit station, its jaw split open in a silent scream, teeth like shattered obelisks. The miners froze. Emperor-fearing men and women who had grown up amid violence, mutation, and horror stared at the remains of something that should not have existed. "Throne," Kargos breathed. "That's not Xenos." They moved forward slowly, their boots crunching over fossilized remains. Skeletons lay half-buried across the cavern floor, some reptilian, some vaguely mammalian. All were titanic, creatures from an age Terra no longer remembered. Some bore signs of immense trauma, shattered spines, ruptured skulls, bones scorched black as if by unimaginable heat. "What killed them?" Lysa asked. No one answered. As they advanced, the ground began to slope upward. At first, Kargos thought it was debris, collapsed rock, a tectonic uplift, some forgotten Imperial megastructure, buried by millennia of construction. But the slope continued, rising steadily, impossibly, until it loomed over them. A mountain beneath the surface of Terra. Its silhouette dominated the cavern, jagged and immense, its surface ridged like eroded stone. Great spines jutted from its back in a serrated line, each one taller than a cathedral spire. The miners stood at its base, dwarfed, confused, and afraid. This makes no sense," Lysa said. "There are no mountains left. Terra was stripped bare before the Age of Strife." Kargos raised his lumen high. The rock was not rock. It was hide. Ancient, scarred, scaled hide, cracked like the surface of a dead world. Colossal claws rested half-buried in the dust, each talon longer than a chimera transport. The slope was a chest. The ridges were a spine. They were not standing before a mountain. They were standing before a god. The cavern trembled. Dust rained from the unseen ceiling as a deep subsonic thrum rolled through the stone. The miners staggered, clutching at one another as the ground shook again. "What did we do?" someone sobbed. Above them, far, far above, the breach they had torn open allowed a thin spear of light to stab downward, and along with it came something else. Radiation. Not the slow background poison of the hive, but a raw, unfiltered surge. Ancient reactor emissions from forgotten strata, disturbed and unleashed by the drill. Invisible waves poured into the cavern, washing over the titanic form like a benediction. The spines along the creature's back began to glow. At first it was faint, a dull, sickly blue pulsing beneath layers of dust and stone. Then brighter, stronger. The light crawled along each dorsal plate like lightning trapped in crystal. The miners screamed. The mountain breathed. A vast inhalation drew air inward, creating a gale that nearly tore the workers from their feet. Dust and bones lifted into the air, swirling like a storm. The creature's chest expanded, cracking ancient sediment with the sound of grinding continents. One massive eye opened. It burned with nuclear fire. Kargos dropped to his knees. His mind rejected what his eyes saw. But his soul, trained from birth to recognize the divine and the damnable, understood. This was no demon. This was no Xenos. This was something older than the Imperium, older than Terra's desecration. A relic of a primordial age, entombed beneath humanity's cradle and forgotten. A god of ruin. The eye focused, locked onto the tiny, insignificant shapes at its feet. The creature shifted, muscles the size of city districts rolling beneath its hide. Stone cracked, entire skeletons shattered as its weight adjusted. The cavern wall screamed in protest, stress fractures racing outward like spiderwebs. The dorsal spines blazed brighter, the blue light intensifying until it painted the cavern in an unholy glow. Liza screamed as the heat washed over her, her rebreather alarms shrieking. "Run," Kargos roared, though he knew it was futile. The creature rose. Not fully. Terra itself resisted. The planet screaming as ancient bedrock was forced aside. But enough. Enough for the miners to see its true scale, its terrible majesty. Its head lifted, its jaws opened, and the roar that followed was not sound alone. It was pressure, fury, and memory given voice. A bellow that carried the weight of extinction, that echoed through the cavern and upward into the depths of the Throneworld itself. A roar that shook the foundations of the Imperium. The miners were thrown from their feet, lumens shattering, eardrums bleeding, minds breaking as the ancient king awakened at last. And far above, in the highest spires of Terra, something else stirred in response. The God Emperor's world had remembered its oldest nightmare, and Godzilla had awakened. The roar did not fade. It rolled outward through the bones of Terra, a continent-breaking roar that tunneled through stone, ferrocrete, and adamantium alike. It raced up forgotten transit shafts and sealed catacombs, through reliquary vaults and abandoned strata, until the very foundations of the Throneworld howled in response. Deep below, in the cavern that had not seen light for an age measured in extinctions, the god moved. Godzilla clawed forward. Each motion was slow at first, burdened by millennia of sleep and kilometers of planetary crust. His talons bit into the bedrock of Terra, carving furrows wider than streets. Stones that had survived the age of strife shattered like brittle glass. Ancient layers, prehistoric earth, forgotten megastructures, and the buried corpses of civilizations long erased. They were all torn aside as he hauled himself upward. The planet resisted. Terra screamed in stress fractures and seismic shrieks as titanic force was applied where none had ever been meant to exist. Entire sublevels collapsed in chain reactions. Void shields flared and died. Auspex arrays overloaded, unable to process the impossible readings flooding their machine spirits. Behind him, the cavern collapsed in on itself, crushing the remains of the long-dead titans that had once challenged the king and failed. Their bones were ground to dust beneath his passage, erased utterly as history was rewritten. The miners never had a chance. They were insects beneath a god's indifference, crushed or flung aside as Godzilla surged upward. Driven by instinct older than Terra's name, radiation poured down through the breach they had opened, saturating him, awakening cells that had slumbered since before humanity learned to shape fire. The dorsal plates along his spine blazed brighter with every meter gained. Above, higher, closer to the surface. Hive Primus, mid-spire districts. At first, people thought it was a malfunction. The tremors were subtle, cups rattling on tables, lumen strips flickering. incense braziers swaying in shrine alcoves. Servitors paused mid-task, their augmetics recalibrating as the ground shifted beneath them. Seismic fluctuation, an administratum adept muttered, glancing at his slate. Probably another deep strata collapse. Log it, and the tremor intensified. Walls creaked. Stained glass windows depicting the Emperor's triumphs shuddered, hairline cracks racing across saintly visages. A low rumble rose through the hive, felt as well as heard, vibrating in their teeth and bones. People stopped. They listened. Fear crept in, slow and cold. Then came the sound. A deep, thunderous impact, as if something unimaginably massive had struck the foundations of the world from below. Screams erupted. In the mid-hives, manufactorum workers were thrown from gantries as entire sections of floor buckled. Conveyor lines snapped. Heavy machinery toppled like toys. In the hab levels, families clutched one another as walls split open, revealing the darkness beyond. "This isn't an earthquake," someone shouted. "Earthquakes don't move." The rumbling became rhythmic. Impact, drag, impact. Something was climbing. Far above, in the spires that brushed Terra's poisoned skies, the tremors reached even the palaces of the Adeptus. Alarms wailed in Mechanicus sanctums as tectonic readings spiked beyond acceptable parameters. Tech priests chanted binaric prayers as data scrolls streamed catastrophic projections. "Source identified," crackled a Vox officer, his voice tight. "Deep core anomaly ascending. Mass. Throne preserve us. Mass estimates are escalating beyond any known parameters." In the shadowed halls of the Imperial Palace, custodes halted mid-patrol, their guardian spears humming as the stone beneath their boots vibrated. Something ancient had stirred, and it was coming up. The surface of Terra split open like a wound. In Hive Primus's lower sprawl, an entire district simply ceased to exist. The ground bulged outward, ferrocrete and adamantium plates bending like wax. Spires tilted, then snapped, collapsing into the widening fissure as a shockwave blasted outward, flattening everything within kilometers. Then the earth exploded. A colossal claw burst free, talons ripping through hab blocks and cathedral buttresses as if they were paper. The claw slammed down, anchoring itself, and with a deafening roar of tearing metal and stone, Godzilla hauled himself into the open. He emerged into the light of a dying world. Miles and miles of Hive City disintegrated as his bulk forced its way free. Entire neighborhoods slid into the abyss left by his ascent. Statues of Imperial saints shattered against his hide, reduced to rubble beneath his weight. When he finally stood, fully above the surface, Godzilla towered over the hive like a living apocalypse. His head rose higher than the tallest spires, his tail dragged behind him, carving a trench through the city. Dorsal plates blazed with radiant blue light, casting harsh illumination over the ruins of humanity's greatest world. For a moment there was silence. Then Godzilla looked around. He saw no forests, no oceans, no living world. The skies were choked with ash and pollution, a perpetual twilight of smog and orbital debris. The land was entombed beneath metal and stone, a planet flayed and rebuilt into a monument to endless war. Rivers were gone, replaced by waste channels. The air burned with toxins and industry. And far away, so far yet felt, he sensed the absence of the oceans. Boiled, stripped, murdered. Godzilla's eyes burned brighter. A low growl rolled from his chest, vibrating through the ruins. It was not mindless rage. It was something colder and older. This world had been violated, despoiled. He threw back his head and roared, a sound of fury and accusation that battered the hive and echoed across the planet. Vox networks overloaded. Pilgrims dropped to their knees, blood pouring from their ears as the sound crushed them. "He's real," sobbed a woman clinging to the remains of a shrine, staring up at the Titan. "By the Emperor, he's real." Some fell to worship, others ran. Most simply froze, their minds unable to comprehend what stood before them. Godzilla inhaled. Radiation saturated the air. Reactor cores, void shield emitters, power relays for a city that spanned continents. It was everywhere, a feast beyond imagining. The glow along his dorsal spines intensified as the energy flooded him. Muscles grew, ancient power roaring back to full strength. He straightened, fully awakened, fully enraged. The dorsal plates locked into alignment. Blue light surged upward along his spine, growing brighter with every heartbeat. The air screamed as particles ionized, reality itself bending under the gathering force. The Skitarii Marshal looked up just in time to see the light build in Godzilla's throat. Omnissiah preserve. The atomic breath erupted. A column of annihilating blue fire lanced forward, cutting through the hive like a god's wrath made manifest. Spires vanished in fury. Void shields flared and failed in microseconds. Entire districts were erased, reduced to molten slag and ash. The blast swept for miles, carving a glowing scar through the cityscape and punching a hole straight through multiple hive layers beyond. Shockwaves followed, flattening what the beam had spared. Godzilla swept his head, the beam tracking with it, methodically cleansing the metal cancer from the planet's surface. People died by the tens of thousands in seconds. From the perspective of a lone guardsman thrown clear by the initial blast, the world was ending. He stared in horror as the blue fire consumed everything he had ever known. "This is judgment," he whispered, tears streaking through the grime on his face. Godzilla roared again, triumphant and furious, and brought his tail around in a sweeping arc. Entire hive towers crumpled as if struck by a god's hammer, collapsing into clouds of debris and fire. Fires burned across the horizon. The Throneworld bled. In the void above Terra, defense platforms began to reorient, their machine spirits shrieking as targeting arrays struggled to lock onto the impossible shape moving below. In the depths of the Imperial Palace, a single order was issued. Short, absolute, unquestionable. Imperial fists. Deploy immediately. Deep within their fortress monastery, gene-forged warriors of yellow and black turned from prayer and preparation. Bolters were armed. Power fists hummed to life. Thunderhawks screamed as they launched toward a world under siege. On Terra, Godzilla turned toward the distant spires of the Imperial Palace. dorsal plates blazing like stars. The defenders of humanity were coming, and the king of monsters stood ready. The sky above Terra burned. Thunderhawks screamed through layers of ash and smog, their engines howling like caged beasts as contrails of fire tore across the poisoned heavens. They came in disciplined formation, black and yellow sigils stark against scorched hulls, their machine spirits roaring hymns of war as they descended toward the apocalypse unfolding below. The Imperial fists had been unleashed. Within the cavernous holds of the gunships, Space Marines stood locked in place by mag clamps, statues of ceramite and fury. Bolters were checked for the final time. Power fists hummed with restrained energy. Chaplains intoned battle prayers, their vox-amplified voices cutting through the thunder of the engines. "This world is the Emperor's bastion," boomed Chaplain Rhetoricus, Crozius clenched in his gauntlet. "We are its walls. We do not bend. We do not yield. We endure." The warriors roared their reply, a thunderous chorus that rattled the Thunderhawk's armoured ribs. "We are the wall." Below them, Godzilla advanced. Each step crushed kilometres of hive beneath his feet. His claws carved trenches through ferrocrete and adamantium alike, his tail demolishing entire districts with lazy, contemptuous sweeps. Fires raged across the horizon, painting the Titan's scarred hide in flickering orange and blue. The king of monsters paused. He sensed them. Tiny, armoured, defiant. Godzilla turned his head as the first Thunderhawks broke cloud cover, their hulls bristling with weapons. "Target acquired," Vox Captain Helbrecht Var intoned from the command Thunderhawk. "All units, initiate containment protocol Dawn." Containment, not kill. The implication was not lost on anyone. Drop pods fell like meteors. Dozens of them screamed through the atmosphere, ablative plating burning away as retros flared at the last second. They slammed into the ruins around Godzilla, with earth-shaking force, ceramite petals exploding outward as squads of Imperial fists emerged into hell. Formed firing lines. Bolters barked. Mass reactive rounds detonated against Godzilla's hide in chains of explosions, sparks flying like fireworks across his chest and limbs. Heavy bolters opened up, shells the size of a man's forearm hammering into the Titan with relentless power. They did nothing. The round detonated harmlessly against scales older than Terra, leaving scorch marks that faded almost instantly. Godzilla barely noticed. "Escalate," Helbrecht Var ordered. "Devastator squads, engage." Las cannons fired. Brilliant beams of coherent light stabbed into Godzilla's torso, raking across his chest and shoulders. Plasma cannons followed. Superheated suns hurled from armoured gauntlets. Crack missiles screamed through the air, slamming into joints, neck, skull. For a moment, just a moment, the Titan recoiled. Smoke rose from his hide. A scorched furrow glowed along one dorsal plate. A cheer rose from the Astartes. Then Godzilla roared. The sound battered the Imperial fists like a physical blow. Several Marines were thrown from their feet as the shockwave rolled outward, flattening ruins and ripping drop pods from the ground. Godzilla stepped forward. A Thunderhawk strafed low, assault cannons chewing into the Titan's face. rounds sparking against his eye ridge. Godzilla swatted it from the sky. The gunship vanished in a blossom of fire, wreckage tumbling end over end into the ruins below. "Void shields failing," cried a Vox officer. "We're losing air superiority." Godzilla charged. Not fast, nothing that large needed speed, but unstoppable. His foot came down on a Devastator squad, crushing them into the ground along with the ruins they stood upon. His tail whipped around, smashing a line of Astartes through a hab tower, their ceramite armor folding like tin beneath the impact. Yet still, the Imperial fists held. Squads repositioned with mechanical precision, firing as they moved, covering one another without hesitation. A venerable dreadnought lumbered into view, assault cannon roaring as it unloaded into Godzilla's knee. The Titan staggered half a step, ancient eyes narrowed. Godzilla reached down. His claws closed around the dreadnought's sarcophagus. For a heartbeat, the ancient warrior inside roared defiance through external vox, his voice ancient and proud. "For Dawn and the Emperor." Godzilla crushed him. Ceramite screamed. Adamantium buckled. The dreadnought was reduced to scrap in the Titan's grip, its reactor detonating harmlessly against Godzilla's palm. Radiation washed over the king. He drank it in. The dorsal plates along his spine flared brighter. "Containment failing," Helbrecht Var said grimly. "All units, fall back to secondary lines. Buy time." Time? For what? None could say. Godzilla advanced through the Imperial fists like a living, natural disaster. Bolter fire raked his legs, melter beams burned against his hide, chain fists tore at his ankles, carving shallow gouges that sealed almost instantly. Godzilla inhaled. The air around him screamed as energy gathered, the blue glow racing up his dorsal plates like a rising sun. "Atomic discharge," shouted a sergeant. "Get to cover." Too late. The atomic breath erupted. A Devastator line vanished in incandescent fury, reduced to shadows burned into the ruins behind them. A land raider was caught mid-turn, its void shields flaring for a fraction of a second before collapsing, the tank melting into slag beneath the beam. Godzilla swept the breath across the battlefield, carving a glowing arc through the cityscape and the ranks of the Emperor's finest. When the beam ceased, nothing remained in its path but molten glass and floating ash. Still, some lived. A single tactical squad, Squad Aurelian, stood their ground atop a shattered plaza, smoke curling from their armor. Their sergeant, Brother Castellan Marcus Aurelian, rose to his feet, bolter ruined, his power sword cracked. Around him his brothers stood bloodied, but unbroken. Status, Marcus voxed. "Ammo low," replied Brother Tyrus. "Armor is compromised." Brother Lauren laughed softly. "Guess this is where the wall ends." Marcus looked up. Godzilla loomed over them, his dorsal plates blazing, eyes fixed on the defiant cluster of yellow and black at his feet. The sergeant planted his banner into the cracked stone. "Imperial fists," he said calmly, raising his shattered sword. "This ground is ours." The Marines formed up around him, weapons raised, bolters clicking empty but still aimed. They did not run. Godzilla inhaled. The glow in his throat intensified, blue-white light spilling from between his teeth. The heat alone blistered ceramite, alarms screaming within the Astartes' armor. Marcus smiled beneath his helm. "Hold," he said. The atomic breath fired. Light consumed them. For an instant, the squad stood silhouetted against annihilation. Unyielding, defiant, unbroken. Then they were gone. The plaza vanished with them, reduced to a crater of molten stone and vaporized ceramite. Godzilla straightened, smoke curling from his jaws. Around him the battlefield was silent. The Imperial fists had fallen back, or died. High above, more drop pods screamed through the sky. The war for Terra had only just begun. The fires did not die. They spread. Terra's surface, already a scarred corpse world of steel and stone, burned brighter with every passing moment as Godzilla moved. Hive spires collapsed in slow motion, avalanches of ferrocrete and plasteel cascading down like rotten teeth torn from the jaw of the planet. Smoke columns clawed at the sky, joining the perpetual storm of ash that never truly cleared above the homeworld. Godzilla walked through it all, not in rage or in triumph, but instinct. He turned away from the killing ground where the Imperial fists had broken themselves upon him. The echoes of bolter fire and dying vox channels faded behind him as he moved toward the horizon, towards space, towards silence, toward anything that was not this choking hive of noise and resistance. He sought distance. He found none. Godzilla halted as the ground ahead trembled, not from his own footsteps, but from synchronized movement. Rows of armored silhouettes emerged through the smoke. Lehman Russ battle tanks, their cannons already elevating. Behind them, basilisk artillery dug in, earthshakers thundering as they fired in staggered salvos. Skitarii maniples advanced in perfect lockstep, galvanic rifles crackling with energy. Imperium forces, everywhere. Godzilla turned his head. More appeared behind him. Chimeras disgorged ranks of Astra Militarum infantry, banners snapping in the superheated wind. Above, Valkyries hovered like predatory birds, rocket pods locking in. In the far distance, the unmistakable silhouettes of night houses strode into view, ion shields flaring like artificial suns. The Throneworld had awakened fully now, and it was afraid. Godzilla exhaled slowly, a low rumble rolling from his chest. His dorsal plates flickered, not yet blazing but pulsing, reacting to something deeper than combat. Radiation. Terra was saturated with it. Not the clean radiation of weapons or reactors alone, but something older, stranger. Residual energies from forgotten wars, buried technologies, and the Golden Throne itself. Leaks from ancient vaults. Power bled from the Astronomicon's shadow. The planet was a tomb of unstable forces, and Godzilla drank them in. Cracks along his scales sealed shut, molten tissue knitting back together with terrifying speed. Scorch marks faded, shattered dorsal plates reforged themselves with a grinding sound like tectonic plates shifting. His heartbeat slowed, deepened, resonating through the ground. He was healing. He was growing stronger. The first artillery barrage hit. Earthshaker shells slammed into Godzilla's torso and legs, detonating with enough force to level city blocks. Fire swallowed him, shockwaves tearing through nearby structures. Infantry cheered. believing, hoping that the Titan had finally fallen. The smoke cleared. Godzilla stood unmoved. His eyes burned brighter now, reflecting the firestorm around him. He stepped forward. Tanks fired. Battle cannon rounds struck his chest, bursting against his scales in thunderous explosions. Godzilla's claws dug into the ground as he leaned into the impact, and then he surged forward. He was among them in seconds. A Lehman Russ vanished beneath his foot, crushed so completely it detonated in a violent bloom of flame. Godzilla swung his tail in a wide arc, obliterating an entire armored column, vehicles spinning through the air like toys before smashing into the ruins. Infantry broke. Lasfire stitched uselessly against his hide as guardsmen fled, their discipline shattering in the face of something no amount of faith could stop. Valkyries screamed overhead, rockets slamming into Godzilla's back. He reached up. One Valkyrie was swatted from the sky, its fuselage folding in half before it exploded against a hab block. Another tried to pull away. Godzilla's atomic breath fired. The beam speared upward, slicing the aircraft in half mid-flight, its wreckage raining down in molten fragments. Night engines charged. The towering war machines advanced, ion shields flaring as they unleashed their arsenal. Thermal cannons washed Godzilla in white-hot fury. Gatling weapons screamed, shells ricocheting in endless streams. A Night Gallant charged, Reaper chainsword revving as it closed the distance. Godzilla met it head-on. The chainsword bit into his thigh, carving deep, smoking gouges. The Knight's pilot roared in triumph. Godzilla grabbed the Knight by the torso. He lifted the war engine off the ground. Ion shields flared, collapsed, flared again, and failed. Godzilla slammed the Knight into the ground, once, twice, 3 times, until the reactor breached and the machine detonated in a blinding flash. The explosion washed over Godzilla harmlessly, radiation feeding him, wounds sealing even as they were inflicted. The remaining Knights hesitated. Godzilla roared. The sound tore through Vox networks, shattering glass kilometers away, and drove men to their knees, clutching bleeding ears. He unleashed atomic breath again, sweeping it across the battlefield. Knights died. Tanks melted. The Imperium's line disintegrated. High above, in low orbit, the strike cruiser Bastion of Dawn watched in silence. Holofeeds filled the strategium, showing Godzilla's advance from 100 angles. Officers stood rigid at their stations, faces pale beneath service caps. Servo skulls drifted silently, recording every second of the catastrophe. "Surface forces are collapsing," reported a naval officer. "Casualties exceeding projected tolerances." The captain stood at the center of the chamber, fists clenched behind his back. His armor bore fresh scorch marks, a reminder that he had been planetside not long ago. "Orbital lance batteries are ready," another officer said. "We can end this." There was a pause, a long one. The captain turned slowly, his expression carved from stone. "No." The word echoed through the chamber. Firing from orbit risks catastrophic collateral damage. Hive layers would collapse. Vaults beneath the Panis could rupture. The Golden Throne. He did not finish the sentence. Silence followed. "We hold fire," he said at last. "We cannot glass our own cradle." "And if it reaches the inner hives?" someone asked quietly. "Then Terra bleeds," he said, "but it does not burn." Another officer stepped forward. "Captain, are reinforcements on the way?" The captain looked back to the hololith. Godzilla tore through another defensive line, atomic fire painting the world blue. "Yes," he said. "God Emperor, help us," murmured the officer. Godzilla slowed, not from exhaustion, but from awareness. The ground ahead vibrated differently now. He turned toward the sound. Each footstep that answered his movement was heavier than anything he had yet faced. Measured, rhythmic, like the march of a walking fortress. Through the smoke and fire, shapes emerged. Titans. Warlord-class engines advanced first, cathedral spires and banners rising above the ruins, their void shields shimmering like translucent domes of power. Behind them came reavers, faster, hunched predators bristling with weapons. Further still, the ground shook with the arrival of something larger, something whose silhouette alone bent the air around it. An Imperator Titan. Its cannons tracked downward, its war horns sounded. Godzilla stood his ground. His dorsal plates flared brighter than ever before, radiation roaring through his veins, the planet itself feeding him strength. He tilted his head back and roared, not in challenge, but in recognition. At last, worthy foes. The Titans advanced, and the world held its breath. The ground shook beneath Godzilla's feet as the Titans advanced, not from fear, from mass. Each step of the warlords split streets apart like cracked ice. Their cathedral spires scraped the smoke-choked sky. Banners snapped in the radioactive wind. Void shields shimmered around them like artificial suns, bending dust, ash and firelight into warped halos. Godzilla roared again, longer this time. Not a challenge, but rage. There was no sea, no deep, endless dark where he could sink and let the world forget him. Only stone, only metal, only enemies. The city pressed in around him, a maze of dead towers and burning bones. The air burned his lungs. The ground vibrated with machines that would not stop coming. He turned, looking for distance. There was none. Titans in front, armored regiments behind, sky full of burning contrails. Godzilla's claws dug into the ruined street. His dorsal plates pulsed, brightening as radiation poured into him from broken reactors, ruptured vaults, and the bleeding heart of Terra itself. The planet fed him, but it was not enough. Not forever. The Titans opened fire. The first salvo came from a warlord's macro-Gatling blaster. Shells the size of drop pods screamed across the battlefield, each one detonating with the force of a city-killer bomb. They tore into Godzilla's chest in a chain of explosions that drowned him in fire. He staggered. For the first time since awakening on Terra, Godzilla was forced back. Another warlord fired its volcano cannon. A beam of white-hot annihilation slammed into Godzilla's shoulder and burned clean through flesh and scale. Molten blood poured down his arm in glowing rivers. He roared in pain, the sound cracking buildings miles away. Reavers joined in. Turbo lasers carved glowing trenches across his ribs. Plasma destructors hurled miniature suns that exploded against his spine, tearing dorsal plates loose in showers of molten shards. Godzilla charged. He smashed through the ruins toward the nearest warlord, each step crushing city blocks into dust. More shells hammered into him, blowing chunks of flesh from his legs, carving smoking craters across his chest. But he did not stop. The warlord's void shield flared brighter as Godzilla reached it. He slammed his claws against the shimmering barrier. The impact sent a shockwave across the battlefield. Buildings collapsed outward like waves. The void shields rippled, bent, and held. The warlord fired point blank. The blast tore into Godzilla's face. One eye burst in a spray of burning fluid. Half his skull glowed red hot. He reeled, roaring, blood and steam pouring from his wounds. He answered with fire. Godzilla inhaled. Energy surged up his spine. The broken dorsal plates flared blue-white. His throat glowed like a newborn star. His atomic breath erupted. The beams smashed into the warlord's void shields. They held for a heartbeat, then another. Then they screamed. The shields collapsed in a thunderclap of ruptured energy. The beam punched through the Titan's chest. It burned through cathedral walls, reactor chambers, and adamantium bones. The warlord's upper half melted, falling away in a river of glowing metal. Its reactor detonated. The explosion tore a crater kilometers wide. The Titan's remains rained down like rain. The blast washed over Godzilla, feeding him even as it burned him. He roared in triumph. Another Reaver charged him, chainsword revving, cannons firing. Its blade bit into his thigh, soaring deep, spilling molten blood. Godzilla grabbed the Titan by the head and tore it free from its body. He hurled the screaming machine into another Reaver, crushing both in a storm of fire and wreckage. The Imperator advanced. Its shadow swallowed entire districts, its cannons realigned, one by one. The world shook as it fired. Plasma annihilators drowned Godzilla in white fury. Hellstorm cannons rained destruction across his back. Volcano cannons burned trenches through his torso that did not close. For the first time, wounds stayed open. Godzilla roared, but the sound was different now. Angrier, sharper, desperate. He turned away from the Titans and charged into the city itself. If he could not escape, he would break the cage. He smashed through hive spires, ripping them apart with his claws. Towers collapsed against him in avalanches of stone and steel. He tore through districts, flattening miles of city with each step. More Titans fired into his back as he fled, but he did not turn. He searched for water, any water. He found only fire. Godzilla reached a massive hive lake, long since poisoned and half evaporated by war. He plunged his head into it. The water boiled instantly, flashing into steam that scalded his skin. He roared and pulled back, blinded by heat and smoke. No ocean, no escape. The Titans closed in again. Godzilla turned, fury consuming what remained of his restraint. He inhaled deeper than ever before. The glow along his spine blazed like a second sun. Cracks spread across his scales as energy tore through him. The atomic breath exploded from his jaws in a beam wider than a fortress. He swept it across the battlefield. A Reaver vanished, sliced clean in half, its reactor detonating mid-air. Another Titan lost its legs, collapsing as its upper body melted into slag. A third was caught mid-step, burned from existence, leaving only a glowing shadow in the dust. The beam struck the Imperator's void shields. They flared, dimmed, flared again. Godzilla pushed more power into it, screaming as his own flesh burned from the strain. The shields shattered. The beam carved into the Imperator's lower structure, melting whole bastions, igniting internal magazines, ripping apart its walking fortress legs. The Imperator staggered, its war horns howling in agony. But it did not fall. Its remaining cannons fired. The blast hit Godzilla square in the chest. There was no explosion, no fireball, only absence. A chunk of his torso simply vanished, erased by annihilation energy. He staggered back, choking, blood and light pouring from the wound. The dorsal plate dimmed. Godzilla tried to inhale again. The glow came slower this time, and the Titans kept firing. Shells and beams tore into him without pause. His legs buckled. One knee slammed into the ground, shattering streets for miles. He pushed himself upright, roaring defiance, but his roar came out weaker. Another blast struck his head. His vision blurred, and the world spun. Godzilla swung wildly, smashing a warlord into ruins, but the motion tore his own damaged muscles further. Blood poured down his legs. Wounds closed slower. Some did not close at all. Radiation was not enough anymore. He was bleeding it faster than he could drink it. The Imperator advanced, burning, broken, but alive. Its cannons aligned for a final volley. Godzilla tried to charge, but his leg gave way. He crashed to the ground, the impact flattening everything around him in a vast ring of ruin. He struggled, claws gouging trenches through stone as he tried to rise. Titans fired into his flanks, into his back, into his wounded chest. Each blast tore more strength from him. He inhaled one last time. The glow flickered weakly in his throat. The atomic breath sputtered out in a thin, fading beam that barely scarred the ground. Godzilla roared, but it was hoarse now, tired. The Titans closed in, weapons raised. Godzilla's head sank to the ground. His chest heaved. Each breath came slower than the last, his dorsal plate dimming to a faint, dying glow. The battlefield went quiet, not from peace, from awe. The king of monsters lay in the ruins of Terra, bleeding molten light into the corpse world, surrounded by walking gods of war that still feared him. The Imperator raised its cannons for the killing blow. Godzilla lifted his head one last time. His single remaining eye burned with defiance. Then his strength failed. His head fell back to the shattered stone, and the world held its breath. The warp noticed. It always did. Across the Imperium, storms howled and bled into one another like wounded animals. Demons tore at each other for scraps of power. Empires of madness rose and collapsed in the time it took a mortal heart to beat. And upon a throne of brass and skulls, Khorne leaned forward. He felt it. Not prayer, not worship, not ritual. Violence. Pure, unfiltered, titanic. A creature had walked Terra and turned the Throneworld into a graveyard of giants. Titans had fallen screaming beneath its claws. Cities had died by the millions under its feet. No strategy, no trickery, no sorcery. Only destruction. Khorne's laughter rolled through the warp like a million war horns. "Yes," thundered the blood god, his voice cracking reality. "Yes, little world, bleed for me." He watched Terra through rivers of blood and fire, through visions torn from dying minds. He saw the monster, wounded, defiant, surrounded by gods of war. A king without a crown, a weapon without a master, a beast that fought because it could not stop. Khorne rose from his throne. Skulls clattered and avalanched down the steps as he stood, towering even over his own fortress. "Fight," he rumbled. "Fight until you break." And on Terra, the world prepared to deliver its final blow. The Imperator's cannons glowed like newborn stars. Warlords and reavers formed a ring of iron and fire around the fallen king of monsters. Their banners burned in the wind. Their void shields shimmered like judgment itself. Godzilla lay amid a continent of ruin. His breath came in slow, shuddering waves. Each inhale dragged fire through his ruined lungs. Each breath out leaked blue light from wounds that no longer closed. His heart still beat, slow, heavy, defiant. The Titans fired. The first salvo struck his side. Volcano cannons bored through it, punching tunnels of annihilation clean through his body. Plasma washed across his back, peeling flesh from bone in glowing sheets. Godzilla roared. The sound was broken, but it still shook the ground. He tried to rise. His claws dug trenches through the stone. His legs trembled and failed. Another blast struck his neck. His head slammed back into the ruins. The Imperator fired again. A beam of absolute destruction tore through his chest and erased what remained of his heart. There was no explosion, only silence. For a moment, nothing moved. Then the dorsal plates went dark. The glow faded from his wounds, from his eyes, from the air around him. Godzilla did not breathe again. The Titans lowered their weapons. Across Terra, men fell to their knees. Some cheered, some wept. Some simply stared, unable to understand what it had taken to kill something so vast. The king of monsters lay still, dead. Darkness took him, not the quiet darkness of sleep, but a falling darkness. Endless, weightless, cold. Godzilla felt no pain, no heat, no sound, only motion. He fell through nothing. Images flickered around him, burning cities, falling titans, oceans he would never see again. His body was gone. He was only memory and instinct drifting through black. Then the darkness tore open. Red light flooded in. Heat returned. Not the clean heat of radiation, but a thick, choking heat that tasted of blood and iron. Godzilla felt himself again. Weight, mass, flesh. He slammed down onto solid ground. He roared, then stopped. His voice was whole. He looked down. His body was restored, scales unbroken, dorsal plates blazing blue, muscles whole and powerful. He flexed his claws. They gleamed like living obsidian. He lifted his head. The sky was wrong. It was not sky at all, just endless red clouds boiling around a black sun that screamed instead of shone. Rivers of blood flowed between mountains of skulls. Towers of brass rose like jagged teeth, crowned with chains and banners made from flayed skin. The air smelled of war. Godzilla growled uneasy. This place was not Earth, not Terra, not any world he recognized. The ground shook. Not from him, from something else. A presence moved behind him, so vast it bent the air itself. Godzilla turned, and the horizon split. A figure rose from the landscape, as if the world itself were kneeling before it. Mountains of brass formed its armor. Rivers of blood poured from its throne-like back. Its eyes burned like suns forged in hatred. Khorne stood before him. Not a man or a beast, not a god that could be understood. A storm of rage given form. Skulls rolled and crushed beneath his steps as he approached. Each footfall echoed like a million war drums. Godzilla bristled. His dorsal plates flared. Energy surged through him by instinct alone. The being laughed. The sound tore the sky open. "Titan," boomed Khorne, his voice shaking the foundations of the warp itself. Godzilla roared back, a challenge born of instinct and confusion. Khorne spread his arms, chains and skulls clattering like applause. "You walked a world of monsters and broke them. You fought without hate, without faith, without lies." He leaned closer, his burning gaze locking onto Godzilla. "You fought because you are made to fight." Godzilla shifted his weight, claws digging into the blood-soaked ground. He did not understand the words, but he understood the message. This thing was not prey. It was not a rival. It was something older than fear. Khorne circled him like a predator admiring a blade. "You died fighting," Khorne said, pleased. "You died facing machines of war, and you did not bow." He stopped before Godzilla, towering over him. "I brought you here," he rumbled, "not as a slave, not as a tool." The blood god's grin split the sky. "But as a titan of my legions, if you choose to bleed with me." Godzilla's dorsal plates flared brighter. He did not know what this place was. He did not know what this thing was. But he knew this. Everything here wanted war. Godzilla took a step forward, facing the towering god of blood and battle. His breath steamed in the red air. His claws flexed. His eyes burned with defiant fire. He did not kneel. He did not flee. He stood his ground. And for the first time since Terra, the king of monsters faced something that might truly be his equal. The sky screamed. The ground bled. And in the heart of the warp, two titans, one born of flesh, one born of rage, stared each other down as the universe waited to see which would break first. The air of the warp trembled as Godzilla and Khorne faced one another. Neither moved. Rivers of blood hissed and boiled around their feet. Skulls shifted like living things, grinding together as if they could sense what was about to happen. The red clouds overhead twisted into spirals, drawn toward the impossible gravity between flesh and God. Godzilla's dorsal plates burned blue-white, casting long, jagged shadows across mountains of bone. Each breath he took shook the ground. Each exhale sent steam rolling through the copper-red air. Khorne loomed before him like a living war. Brass armor formed from continents of metal. Chains thicker than towers dragged behind him, clotted with ancient blood. His eyes were furnaces of endless rage and endless delight. They circled, Godzilla shifted first, claws scraping furrows through skulls and brass dust. His instincts screamed that this thing was not prey, but something that existed beyond rules he understood. And yet, it stood before him. That was enough. Godzilla roared, not in fear or in confusion, but in challenge. The sound ripped through the warp like a blade. Mountains of skulls collapsed. Blood rivers exploded into crimson mist. Demons watching from afar were torn apart by the sheer violence of the sound. Khorne laughed. The laughter was louder than thunder, deeper than planets breaking. "Yes," he boomed. "Show me." Godzilla charged. The ground disintegrated beneath him. He did not run. He advanced like a living catastrophe, each step crushing reality as if it were fragile glass. His claws came down in a strike meant to tear cities apart. They hit Khorne's chest. The impact sent a shockwave that tore the horizon open. Skulls vaporized, brass mountains shattered. Blood rivers leapt into the sky like crimson serpents. Khorne did not fall. He slid back a single step, his heels carving canyons through bone and metal. His grin widened. Glorious. Khorne swung. His fist was the size of a fortress. It crashed into Godzilla's chest with the weight of a dying star. Godzilla was hurled backward, smashing through hills of skulls and crashing into a metal cliff that exploded around him. Godzilla rose immediately, his scales steaming, eyes burning brighter. He inhaled. Energy surged along his spine. The warp itself screamed as his dorsal plates flared brighter than suns. Atomic breath erupted. The beam tore through the red sky, burning holes through clouds of madness, slamming into Khorne's torso in a column of blue-white annihilation. Brass melted, chains vaporized, blood boiled into nothing. For a moment, Khorne disappeared inside the beam. Then he walked through it. The beam burned across his armor, carving molten rivers through brass. But it did not stop him. He grabbed the beam itself, closed his hand around it, and crushed it, shattering Godzilla's breath into fragments of dying light. Khorne laughed harder. He charged. Godzilla met him. They collided like colliding galaxies. Claw met Godfist. Fang met brass. Rage met instinct. Each blow shattered miles of warp landscape. Godzilla tore chunks of living metal from Khorne's armor. Khorne slammed Godzilla through mountains of skulls, through towers of chains, through storms of screaming demons. Godzilla bit into Khorne's arm, his jaw closing around burning metal and godblood. The taste was wrong. Hot, metallic, infinite. Khorne roared, not in pain, but in ecstasy. Yes, bite, Titan. Khorne tore Godzilla free and hurled him into the sky. Godzilla twisted mid-air, fired atomic breath downward, riding the explosion back to the ground like a falling comet. He slammed into Khorne again, driving him back step by step. But neither was winning. They were not trying to. This was not war. It was a celebration. At last, Khorne raised his hand. Enough. Reality obeyed. The ground froze. The blood rivers stilled. The sky locked in place as if time itself had been caught by the throat. Godzilla skidded to a halt, claws gouging trenches as momentum bled away. His dorsal plate still burned, but his next roar died in his throat. Khorne stood tall, armor cracking and glowing, chains broken, godblood steaming where Godzilla had wounded him. He was laughing. "Magnificent," Khorne said, his voice quieter now. "You are not a tool, not a pet, not a thing to be broken." He stepped closer, each step restoring motion to the world around them. "I could destroy you," Khorne said simply, "but why would I shatter such perfection?" Godzilla growled, low and deep, uncertain. Khorne turned his gaze away from him, and the sky split open. Visions poured out, not illusions, but truth. Godzilla saw worlds, Imperium worlds, once green planets stripped to ash and steel, forests burned into fuel, oceans drained into machines, skies blackened by endless industry. He saw hive worlds where no wind touched the ground, where sunlight never reached the streets. Miles-high towers crushed what little soil remained beneath them. Children born under steel skies who had never seen a tree. He saw agri-worlds flayed into monocultures, endless fields of dead green grain grown not for life, but for war. Rivers poisoned by waste. Animals driven extinct because they did not serve production quotas. He saw shrine worlds where even nature had been forced to kneel. Mountains carved into idols. Forests cut to make room for temples of bone and gold. Oceans polluted by holy warships that never left. He saw Terra, again, stripped bare, a planet of tombs and machines. No seas, no wild places, no breath of natural life left. Only monuments to death. Godzilla felt something twist inside him. Not rage, grief. Instinct remembered oceans. Instinct remembered storms. Instinct remembered balance. All gone. "This," Khorne said, gesturing to the visions, "is what your killers serve." He turned back to Godzilla. "They call it order. They call it duty. They call it salvation." His eyes burned brighter. "I call it slaughter without honesty." Khorne spread his arms. "They do not fight for joy, not for truth, not for what they are. They fight because they are told to." The visions shifted, now showing chaos worlds, nature twisted into horror, life devoured by excess, rot, lies and decay. Khorne snarled. "They are no better." He looked at Godzilla again. "You are not like them." Godzilla watched oceans die, forests burn, worlds choke. His claws clenched. "You fought because you exist," Khorne said. "You protect without words. You destroy without malice. You are what you are." He stepped closer, towering over Godzilla once more. "I offer you power." Godzilla's dorsal plate flared warily. "Not to rule," Khorne said, "but to avenge." The words hit like a hammer. Avenge the seas that were boiled. Avenge the forests turned to ash. Avenge worlds turned into corpses that still breathe. Khorne lowered himself until his burning eyes were level with Godzilla's. "I will give you strength to break the machines of empire, to tear down the false order that strangled your world. You will not be my slave." A grin split his face. "You will be my storm." The warp went silent. Godzilla looked at the visions one last time. Dead oceans, black skies, worlds that could never heal. He looked at Khorne, at the god of blood who for once spoke not of conquest, but of vengeance. Godzilla did not understand words, but he understood loss. He lowered his head slightly, not in submission, but in thought. Then he lifted it. He roared. The sound tore through the warp like the birth of a new disaster. Khorne threw back his head and laughed in thunderous joy. Ha ha! Yes! The blood god raised his hands. The sky shattered. Rivers of blood rose into the air like snakes. Storms of fire and brass spiraled inward. The very concept of war, every scream, every clash of blades, every dying breath ever given in battle, was torn from time and hurled toward Godzilla. Take it, Khorne roared. Take my gift. The storm struck. Power crashed into Godzilla like a universe falling on his back. His dorsal plate blazed blinding white, then red, then something beyond color. His scales cracked and reformed. His muscles swelled, tearing and rebuilding in waves. He screamed, not in pain but in transformation. His body grew, larger, heavier, denser. Spines along his back split and branched into jagged crowns of living fire. His claws lengthened, glowing like forged weapons. His eyes burned with rage and instinct. The ground buckled beneath him as his mass increased again, and again, and again. Godzilla threw back his head and roared into the screaming sky. The roar was no longer just sound. It was war. The warp itself recoiled. Khorne stood before him, arms spread, laughing like a god watching his favorite weapon being born. Rise, Titan, Khorne thundered. Rise, my storm of vengeance. Godzilla's body continued to grow, bones reshaping, energy carving new forms into his ancient flesh. His roar climbed higher, deeper, and louder. The sky bled, the ground split, the warp screamed his name without knowing it, and as Godzilla's shadow swallowed mountains of skulls and towers of brass, as his form twisted into something greater, more terrible, the universe held its breath once more, not to see if he would die, but to see what he would become. The world was called Helior Prime. It had once had oceans. That was what the record said. Wide blue seas, storm belts, polar ice, forests that climbed mountain spines like green fire. No living citizen of Helior Prime had ever seen any of it. Now it was a planet of metal. The surface was a single, endless sprawl of manufactoria, refineries, habstacks, fuel oceans, smog towers, and cathedral-sized furnaces that never slept. The sky was permanently brown, stained by smoke and ash. The sun was a pale, sick disk that looked more like a memory than a star. The ground was not soil. It was layered steel and fused stone, built over centuries of industry. Miles down, the corpse of the original planet still existed, buried like a forgotten sin. In the Manufactorum district of Cinder Reach, Overseer Dravos stood on a balcony overlooking a sea of machines. Below him, thousands of workers moved in lines, tiny figures in grey rags and rebreathers. They fed ore into furnaces, hauled slag into grinders, assembled weapon casings, tank hulls, reactor cores and artillery shells. The rhythm of industry was absolute. Dravos checked his slate. Production quotas were behind 0.7%. That was unacceptable. "Drive them harder," he said to the Vox officer beside him. "No rest cycle until the quota is met." The officer nodded without emotion and turned to bark orders. Below, workers stumbled, were dragged back to their feet and forced onward. Those who collapsed were hauled aside, new ones filled the gaps. The machines never noticed. Then the ground trembled. At first, Dravos thought it was a furnace fault. Tremors happened. Deep reactors shifted. Pressure lines ruptured. Ancient foundations cracked. But this tremor did not stop. The metal beneath his boots vibrated, like the heartbeat of something vast. He frowned. "Status?" The Vox officer was already speaking rapidly into his unit, confusion edging his voice. "Multiple seismic anomalies across all districts. Pattern does not match tectonic stress. The source is unknown." The tremor grew stronger. Workers looked up from their stations, fear rippling through the lines. Some dropped tools. Sirens began to howl as systems detected destabilization. Then the sky screamed. The sky itself tore open. Above Helior Prime, the clouds twisted inward like water down a drain. Color bled from the air, replaced by violent red and black. Lightning of impossible shapes ripped across the heavens. The sun vanished behind boiling warp storm clouds. People fell to their knees. Some screamed prayers, some nonsense, some just screamed. The tear widened, splitting the sky from horizon to horizon. And through it, something moved. Something enormous. A shadow fell across entire districts. Dravos staggered back as the light dimmed. He looked up and saw a god fall. Out of the warp, wrapped in storms of blood-red lightning and screaming fire, a colossal being emerged. Scales like mountains of obsidian, spines burning like living stars, eyes that glowed with red-hot wrath. Godzilla crashed into Helior Prime. The impact flattened miles of city in a single heartbeat. Manufactoria vanished under his body like toys crushed beneath a boot. Shockwaves raced outward, tearing hubstacks apart, snapping towers, rupturing fuel lines that ignited into walls of fire. Godzilla rose. He was larger than before. Much larger. Warp energy crawled across his scales like living flame. His dorsal plates burned not blue, but deep crimson, streaked with black lightning. Horn-like spines crowned his back and shoulders, forged from flesh and godfire. His breath steamed with heat and rage. He looked around. There was no ocean, no forest, no living sky, only metal, only smoke, only machines. Godzilla roared. The sound shattered glass across continents. Towers folded in on themselves. Entire districts collapsed as if struck by invisible fists. Then he moved. His first step crushed a cathedral-sized forge into molten ruin. His tail swept through a refinery cluster, turning miles of pipes and tanks into burning scrap. He tore through Manufactoria walls with his claws, ripping open factories that had devoured the planet's bones for 10,000 years. He did not destroy at random. He went for the heart. Refineries, power cores, weapon forges, pollution towers. Every structure that bled poison into the air drew his wrath. Atomic fire burned in his throat, darker than before, streaked with red. He unleashed it. The beam was a river of annihilation. It carved across the city. Entire districts vanished into white-hot nothing. Dravos watched in frozen horror as Cinderreach burned. His manufactoria, his quotas, his perfect lines of production, all reduced to ash beneath a walking apocalypse. "Defense forces," he screamed. "Where are the Titans? Where are the guns?" They answered. Batteries of macro cannons fired from distant bastions. Missiles streaked through the air in endless swarms. Laser batteries carved bright lines across Godzilla's body. They did nothing. Shells exploded against his hide and disintegrated. Missiles detonated like sparks against a furnace. Lasers washed over him without leaving a mark. Godzilla did not even slow. Local armored regiments rolled out, thousands of tanks firing in unison. Their shells vanished against his scales. He stepped on them like insects. He reached a megaforge that fed half the sector's war production. Smoke towers taller than mountains rose from it, poisoning the sky without pause. Godzilla roared and slammed both claws into it. The structure collapsed, its core detonating. Firestorms climbed into the sky. The air itself ignited. Workers ran, screaming, burning, crushed beneath falling metal and shockwaves. Godzilla did not look at them. He looked at the machines. He tore, he burned, he shattered. Every step broke a century of industry. Every breath erased 1,000 sins. The horizon was fire. The sky was blood red. And in the center of it all stood a towering god of destruction, glowing with warp power, tearing down the metal corpse of a planet. Dravos fell to his knees. "This is impossible," he whispered. "Nothing can do this." High above, through the storm-torn sky, laughter roiled like thunder. Not Godzilla's, something older, something vast, something delighted. Godzilla lifted his head and roared again, louder than before. The sound carried through the warp, through space, through fear itself, and from the torn sky, the laughter answered. Khorne laughed. He watched his storm walk another dead world, and the galaxy began to understand that something far worse than war had been born. The warp did not close gently. It never did. The storm that tore Godzilla from Helior Prime was not a retreat. It was a summons. A wound ripped open above the dying Forge World, bleeding red lightning and screaming gravity. Godzilla felt it pull at him, not as command, but as inevitability. The blood god's laughter rolled through the Imperium like distant thunder, not urging him on, merely watching. The storm took him. Reality folded. Fire became color. Color became sound. Godzilla's massive form was dragged through layers of unreality, his newly crowned spines blazing like burning standards. Warp energy clawed at his flesh, testing the god-forged changes Khorne had branded onto him. Where once the Imperium might have torn him apart, now it bent, reluctantly, around his bulk. Then the storm spat him out. The planet below was silent, not dead in the way Helior Prime had been dead, choked by industry, poisoned by progress, but emptied. A world stripped clean down to bedrock and blackened glass. No atmosphere to speak of. No oceans, no forests, no ruins of cities or temples. Just endless stone, cracked and vitrified, carved into impossible geometries. A tomb world. Godzilla slammed into the surface like a falling god. The impact crater was a continent scar. Shockwaves raced across the planet, shattering obelisks, collapsing buried structures, cracking monolithic pylons that had stood since before stars learned to burn. Dust and shards of black metal rose in a vast ring, momentarily eclipsing the dead sun overhead. Godzilla rose from the crater, steam and warp fire bleeding from the fissures in his scales. He was larger again, broader, heavier, denser. His silhouette no longer merely titanic, but mythic. His dorsal spines were no longer simple plates, but jagged, branching crowns of living energy, glowing crimson and void black, crackling with barely contained annihilation. He looked around. Nothing lived. No heartbeat beneath the ground. No wind. No scent of prey or poison. Only a cold, ancient stillness that felt watchful. Then the planet woke up. Green light ignited across the horizon. From beneath the crust, from buried vaults and cyclopean pyramids, Necron structures rose with mechanical inevitability. Obelisks unfolded like blades. Monoliths levitated on silent gravitic fields. Vast pyramids cracked open, their faceted surfaces glowing with emerald circuitry. And from them marched the dead. Necron warriors emerged in ranks without number, skeletal figures of living metal, eyes burning with cold green fire. Immortals followed, heavier, broader, their Gorse weapons humming with disintegration fields. Tomb blades skimmed above the ground in perfect formation, while massive constructs, Triarch stalkers, Doomsday arcs, and towering Canoptech engines, all advanced with mechanical and merciless precision. No roar greeted Godzilla, no challenge, no fear. They did not hate him, they simply calculated him as a threat. Gorse fire erupted. Green beams lanced across the plain, striking Godzilla's chest, arms, and throat. Where the beams touched, reality peeled away layer by layer. Scales flaked into dust. Warp energy bled out in sizzling arcs. For the first time since his rebirth, Godzilla felt pain. He roared. The sound rolled across the tomb world like a planetary quake, cracking obelisks and shattering lesser constructs. The Necrons did not flinch. They recalibrated and fired again. Godzilla inhaled. The air, or what passed for it, collapsed towards his jaws. Warp energy surged along his spine, his dorsal crowns flaring brighter. The ground beneath him liquefied as power gathered, the planet itself screaming in protest. He unleashed his atomic breath. This was not the blue fire of old. This was something far worse. A beam of red-white annihilation tore from his mouth, wrapped in black lightning and warping space around it. It did not merely burn, it unmade. Necron warriors caught in its path did not explode or melt. They ceased to exist, their necrodermis unraveling into subatomic nothingness. Monoliths were carved open like soft stone, their gravity fields collapsing in shrieking feedback. Entire phalanxes vanished in a heartbeat. Godzilla swept the beam across the battlefield, carving a burning arc through the undead legions. The planet's crust glowed where the beam passed, leaving molten scars visible from orbit. Still, the Necrons advanced. Doomsday cannons fired. Focused beams of stellar-grade energy slammed into Godzilla's torso, blasting chunks of armor-thick scale from his body. One beam punched clean through his shoulder, leaving a smoking hole that sealed itself with boiling warp flesh moments later. Godzilla staggered back a step. He snarled low and furious. Warp energy erupted from his body. Not a beam, a wave. A spherical pulse of red-black force exploded outward from his core, flattening everything within miles. Necron constructs were caught mid-advance and disintegrated where they stood, their forms torn apart by raw, God-forged violence. The ground itself peeled away, reduced to atoms that rained down like black snow. Godzilla advanced. Each step sent shockwaves through the planet's mantle. He tore through Necron ranks with claw and tail, his strikes leaving nothing intact. He crushed a Triarch Stalker beneath his foot, then hurled a Doomsday Ark into the horizon, where it detonated in a silent green nova. Gauss fire intensified. Focused beams raked across his limbs, his neck, his face. Where enough fire converged, his flesh began to come apart. Not burned, but deconstructed, stripped molecule by molecule. Warp energy flared in response, sealing wounds almost as fast as they formed. But the strain was visible now. His roar had an edge of fury and effort. The Necrons adapted. High atop the largest pyramid, the planet's central nexus, a structure began to move. Panels slid aside with tectonic slowness. Entire city-sized mechanisms rose from within the pyramid's core, ancient systems awakening for a purpose they had not served in millions of years. A cannon emerged, not a weapon meant for armies, a weapon meant to kill gods. The Gauss Flayer cannon was colossal, its barrel longer than mountain ranges, its focusing arrays glowing with impossible power. Energy began to build within it, emerald light spiraling inward, feeding on the planet's power grid, draining dormant star engines buried beneath the crust. Godzilla felt it, a pressure in his bones, a warning screaming through instinct older than thought. He turned, the cannon locked onto him. Godzilla roared and charged. Necron fire intensified to a blinding storm, tearing chunks from his advancing form, slowing him, stripping scale and flesh alike. Still he advanced, atomic breath flaring again, carving a burning path toward the pyramid. The cannon finished charging. The planet seemed to hold its breath. Then it fired. A beam of pure Gauss annihilation lanced across the surface, striking Godzilla square in the chest. It was not heat or force. It was erasure. His forward momentum halted instantly. The beam bored into him, stripping matter layer by layer, scale by scale, bone by bone. Warp energy screamed as it was torn apart, Godfire unraveling under the cannon's merciless power. Godzilla roared, louder than ever, but the sound fractured, cut short as his chest began to come apart, his massive form held in place by the beam's impossible pull. He fought. Warp energy surged. His dorsal crowns flared blindingly bright. He pushed forward, inch by agonizing inch, claws gouging trenches through vitrified stone as he resisted the beam. For a moment, it seemed as though his sheer fury and divine augmentation might carry him through. But the beam intensified. His left arm disintegrated from the elbow down, unraveling into glowing dust. His chest cavity opened, organs of flesh and warp fire tearing free and vanishing. Cracks raced along his spines as the energy holding him together began to fail. Godzilla stumbled. He dropped to one knee. Still he roared, still he resisted. But even gods can bleed out of reality. The cannon continued to fire. His torso collapsed inward as his core destabilized. Warp energy spilled from him like a dying star, ripping holes in the air around his body. The Necrons did not celebrate. They simply maintained fire. At last, Godzilla's resistance faltered. His massive form began to fade, edges blurring, existence itself loosening its grip. The warp responded, sensing its wounded storm, and a tear began to open behind him. A violent, screaming vortex, clawing at what remained of his body. Godzilla threw his head back and roared one final time. Not in defeat, in defiance. The roar echoed across the tomb world, cracking pyramids and shattering obelisks even as his form unraveled. Then the warp claimed him, ripping him free from the beam in a violent implosion of red-black light. He vanished. The Gorse beams ceased. Silence returned. The Necron stood amid a ruined landscape of molten scars and shattered constructs. The planet was wounded, but intact. The threat had been removed. High above, unseen by any sensor, the warp storm closed. Within the Imperium, something vast and amused laughed again. Godzilla did not die. He fell. Broken, burning, unraveling, he tumbled through the warp, his form collapsing inward, power bleeding away like a storm spent against an immovable shore. Khorne watched without intervening. Storms must break, so they can return stronger. And somewhere in the screaming madness of the warp, the Titan of Vengeance began to change once more. The warp did not let him rest. Godzilla drifted through the Imperium like the broken heart of a storm, his vast form unraveling into fragments of burning memory and fading rage. Where scales had been, there was now fire. Where muscle had fought against annihilation, there was now raw, screaming energy. His roar had become an echo without a throat, his fury a shape without flesh. He was dying, or perhaps becoming. Around him the warp twisted and churned, a sea of madness and blood-lit thunder. Demons scattered from his passing, shrieking as the remnants of his presence burned them away. Even in dissolution, he was too much, too loud, too violent, too real for the Imperium to ignore. And then, the laughter returned. It rolled through the warp like colliding stars, deeper than rage, richer than slaughter. The laughter of a god who had waited an eternity to see something truly worthy break and rise again. Chains of brass and blood formed in the void, coiling around Godzilla's fading essence, not to bind, but to hold, to keep him from scattering, to keep the storm intact. A colossal figure emerged. Khorne. The blood god did not manifest as before. There was no throne of skulls, no mountains of bone. Instead, he was everywhere, a presence so vast that the warp bent inward around him, forming a silhouette only because reality needed something to fear. His eyes burned down into Godzilla's unraveling form, and he smiled. "You broke," Khorne rumbled, not disappointed, but pleased. "Good." The words struck like hammer blows, driving coherence back into Godzilla's form. Fire condensed, energy folded inward, fragments of scale and bone reformed, reforged in godfire and warp light. "Every storm does," Khorne continued. "The weak shatter, and are forgotten. Godzilla's heart, if it could still be called that, thundered back into existence, beating once, then again, each pulse sending shockwaves through the warp. His shape returned, larger than before, denser and heavier with layered power. His dorsal crowns reformed not as spines, but as jagged halos of annihilation, rotating slowly, grinding against reality. But the strong, Khorne leaned closer, his presence crushing entire regions of the Imperium into silence. The strong are reforged. Godzilla roared as sensation returned. Pain, fury, memory. The gauze beam, the erasure, the cold, precise unmaking of his body. His rage ignited anew, hotter and sharper than before. Khorne laughed again. Yes, hold on to that. He raised a massive clawed hand. Within it, the warp itself condensed, drawn screaming into a singularity of blood-red light. The concepts of war, vengeance, defiance, conflict itself were stripped from time and fed into that burning core. I will make you stronger, Khorne declared. Again and again and again. The light slammed into Godzilla. He screamed. His body expanded. His scales became layered with sigils burned directly into reality, each one a scar left by wars fought across eternity. His muscles no longer simply moved matter. They displaced causality. His atomic fire changed. No longer just annihilation, but judgment, infused with warp entropy and God-forged wrath. You will break, Khorne said, and I will raise you. Godzilla's eyes burned open, twin infernos of crimson and void. This cycle will continue, Khorne thundered, spreading his arms as the warp screamed around them, until there is nothing left that can stand before you. The blood god's grin widened. Until there is nothing left that deserves to. Godzilla roared, the sound collapsing entire warp currents. He felt it now, an endless path laid before him. Not conquest or dominion. Cleansing. Khorne pointed. A warp storm opened, vast and violent, leading outward, back toward real space. Go, Khorne said. Godzilla did not hesitate. He charged. The warp storm swallowed him in a hurricane of blood and lightning, hurling his reforged form back into reality with catastrophic force. The planet below was dying. Its skies were choked with spores, vast clouds of drifting biological filth blotting out the sun. Organic towers pierced the clouds like tumors, pulsing and breathing as rivers of biomass flowed through them. The ground crawled with movement, endless tides of tyrannids consuming everything in their path. Forests were gone, oceans reduced to nutrient sludge, entire ecosystems stripped down to raw material and fed into the ever-hungry swarm. The hive fleet had come. The rift tore open above the planet without warning. Reality screamed as Godzilla erupted through the sky like a falling apocalypse, his body wreathed in warp fire and blood-red lightning. He slammed into the surface amid a sea of tyrannid organisms, obliterating millions in a single impact. The shockwave rippled across continents, flattening biostructures and tearing apart living towers in fountains of ichor. Godzilla rose. He looked around. He felt them. The hive mind's presence pressed against his consciousness. Vast, cold alien. Endless hunger without reverence. Consumption without balance. Life devoured not for survival, but for replication. Godzilla snarled. This was wrong. The Tyranids reacted instantly. Screeching bioforms surged toward him in tidal waves. Hormagaunts, termagants, monstrous creatures bristling with living weapons. Biocannons fired streams of corrosive plasma and needle-sharp projectiles. They hurt. They did not matter. Godzilla inhaled. The planet's atmosphere collapsed as warp-enhanced atomic fire built within him. His dorsal halos flared, spinning faster, grinding sparks of unreality into the air. He unleashed his breath. The beam tore across the surface like the judgment of a furious god. Entire swarms vanished in incandescent annihilation, reduced to nothing but drifting ash and vaporized biomass. Biotowers were carved in half, their internal organs flash-boiled into explosive ruin. Rivers of ichor ignited, burning with unnatural colors as warp fire consumed them. Godzilla advanced, unstoppable. He tore through the swarm with claws and tail, each strike obliterating thousands. Waves of energy pulsed from his body, disintegrating anything that came too close. The hive mind screamed, an alien psychic howl of alarm and fury, but it could not slow him. Then the ground shook. On the horizon, something vast approached. A bio-titan. It towered over the battlefield, a mountain of chitin and muscle, bristling with symbiotic cannons and scything limbs the size of skyscrapers. Its roar echoed across the planet, a challenge issued by the hive mind itself. Godzilla saw it, and for the first time since his rebirth, he smiled. The bio-titan charged. So did Godzilla. They collided like worlds, smashing into each other. The impact shattered the ground beneath them, sending shockwaves racing outward that flattened what remained of the Tyranid swarm. The bio-titan slashed with massive claws, carving gouges into Godzilla's chest, blood splattering across his scales. Godzilla answered with brute force. He seized the bio-titan by the neck and slammed it into the ground hard enough to crack the planet's crust. The creature screamed, thrashing, its cannons firing wildly at point-blank range, burning into Godzilla's flesh. Godzilla roared back. He planted his feet, muscles bulging with god-forged power, and grabbed the bio-titan's jaws. The creature struggled, its massive head snapping shut again and again. But Godzilla was stronger. He forced the jaws open wider, bone creaking under impossible pressure. Warp fire gathered in his throat. The bio-titan realized too late. Godzilla unleashed his atomic breath directly down its throat. The explosion was catastrophic. The bio-titan's entire body convulsed as the beam tore through it from the inside, vaporizing organs, detonating biomass, rupturing plates in a chain reaction of violent implosions. In seconds, the creature collapsed in a smoking ruin, its massive form reduced to burning fragments. Silence fell. What remained of the Tyranid swarm began to scatter, instinct overriding the hive mind's control in the face of an impossible predator. Godzilla threw back his head and roared. The sound rolled across the planet like thunder, a declaration of dominance that echoed into space itself. And high above, unseen, the warp trembled. Korn laughed. Godzilla did not stop. He would not stop. At Khorne's suggestion, not command, never command, he travelled from world to world, carried by warp storms and screaming rifts. Wherever the natural order was violated beyond repair, wherever life was stripped, poisoned, or consumed without balance, he came. Human Forge World burned, Xenos empires fell, hive fleets were shattered, tomb worlds learned fear. He did not rule, he did not conquer, he corrected. And in the warp, upon a throne of skulls and endless war, Khorne watched his storm walk the galaxy and laughed. For he had found something rare, a weapon that did not need chains, a titan that did not need orders, a champion who fought not for glory or dominion or worship, but because the universe itself had taught him what must be destroyed, and the cycle would continue forever.